Good morning, vocal yogis. I want to first give a shout out to Nikki Loney of The Full Voice. If you don't know about her company or her podcast called The Full Voice Podcast, you need to. This mug I was interviewed on her podcast. I'll try to link to the episode that I was on, but I love my mug. Happy singing, and I love my tea. I'm not a caffeine drinker. I think me on caffeine can be a really dangerous thing. I tend to have enough energy without it. But I drink yogi tea, and this is vanilla cinnamon. But what I love is that on my tea bags there are little messages. And this one says, compassion is the fountain of forgiveness. Something to ruminate on today. I see Jen Carter is here. Hi, Jen Carter. I wanted to share with you a story today on Body Talk Tuesday, which I haven't done in a little while. But as I'm getting ready for this core workshop in February, I wanted to share because I've had quite a journey in my own body with addressing the issues in my own core. So my story is this, that after having my second child, who's now a little over 6, I had a number of issues in my body. I've written about them, I've talked about them, and when everything settled down after a couple of weeks of being very immobilized after having him, what I struggled with for probably almost a year and a half was these tension headaches in my neck. I would end every day just wanting to lie down on the floor and close my eyes and go to bed, because I was so miserable with all that stuff that was going on. And I went, I talked to my doctor, and they were like, why don't you do physical therapy? So I said, okay. So I went to physical therapy, and they did, I don't think anyone ever, at that point, no one had done imaging of my neck. They did some traction on my neck, and they started to give me lots of upper body work to do, which makes sense. Oftentimes there's a connection of weakness in the upper body and issues in your shoulders and your neck. However, I was leaving every physical therapy session feeling worse than when I went in. And when I brought it up to them, I was working with a guy who was, he was pretty experienced. It wasn't like I was one of his first clients ever, at a very reputable PT office in town. He was stumped, and they couldn't figure it out. So I went for, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 sessions before I was like, this isn't helping. I actually, I'm feeling worse. I don't want to keep doing this. And it was really at that point that I thought, okay, I had to address the feeling of shame that I had, that I was a movement teacher and my body felt so broken. That was a big thing I had to get over, this idea of feeling broken, and that I needed to be fixed. That's like another conversation for another time. But the issue was my neck problems were stemming from a lack of function in my core. And it wasn't until I got my core back online and functional again that those headaches went away. Now, it's been probably about 4.5 years since I started doing that work. And it didn't happen overnight. There was some hunting around on my part to figure out what it was. And I worked with a number of different people, I think each of whom, including the PT, gave me a piece of the puzzle, but it was like no one could see the whole of my body and figure it out. I tried chiropractic care where they imaged my back, and they were like, whoa, you have a lot going on in your spine, and not in a good way, which I think was probably on some level helpful for me, but really made me feel more broken, of like, okay, well, my spine is pretty fixed. How can that be? Of course, I had no idea at that time that if you took pictures of everyone's spine, everyone would have stuff going on, but not everyone experiences pain with it. So that's another conversation for another time about chronic pain. But what I had to do was find people who were thinking outside the box and working outside the box, because I'm an outside of the box kind of person too. I always describe myself as off the pedagogy page and off the yoga mat type of teacher. And it was consistent work on my core that resolved my neck issues. And now, even today, so I spend time every week. And this year, as I've written about in blogs, I've really challenged myself because I've lived in a place where I realized fear was still dominating how I chose to move. I've walked a lot, and I love walking. But I also love the way that I feel when I move more and when I challenge my body. And when I went skiing, I think I wrote about this a little bit. When I went skiing with my husband over the Christmas week between Christmas and New Year's, I realized that I was terrified that I was going to get hurt. And I thought, what's the likelihood that you're going to get hurt? You've done a lot of work on your body, but I still didn't feel strong. So then I was like, okay, you got to push yourself to go to the next level. I promise I'm going somewhere with this, even if I may forget where I'm going in the middle. But so I have pushed myself more since that day in December to now, where I'm lifting weights and I'm doing these classes called GPP, which is 30 minutes of like kind of high intensity. You go as hard as you want to go. And what's interesting is that every trainer has come up to me at every class that I'm in and has said, I love to see people who are moving slowly and mindfully in these classes. And as I look around, I see the people who are trying to just blaze through it, and their form sucks and they're probably still hurting. But just this morning, I made time to do some dedicated core work, because if I ignore my body, that's when I start to hurt. It used to be when I was in my 20s that like I would overdo it probably and end up hurting. Now in my 40s, it's when I underdo it that I start to feel it. So some core work for me several times a week at varying levels. Sometimes I go back to the real basic stuff. I did real basic this morning just because I was sort of curious about it. But all of that stuff is to say that sometimes we think that where the pain is in our body is the issue, and it's just not the issue. It's simply showing up there. So for me, my neck issues were indicative of the fact that my neck and my shoulders were trying to pick up for the fact that I didn't have the strength that I needed and the function that I needed in my core. Now, I do not have a perfectly flat stomach. I don't know that anyone has a perfectly flat stomach if you really actually relax your belly, but we all walk around thinking that we do. And for me, I did a live last week talking about resting tension. I think I had spent a lot of time walking around with my core half engaged all the time. I probably was in a half kegel a lot of the time without realizing it either. And all of that meant that when it came time for me to move, breathe, sing, I was doing that on top of a level of tension that was sort of too high to start out with, that there wasn't a give and take in the musculature in my abdomen. So when I talk about core work, I'm not talking about just like your rectus abdominis, your internal and external obliques, and your transverse abdominis. Those are important, but to me, that's not just your core. Your core is like from where your head attaches to your neck, where your arms attach to your torso, and where your legs come into your hips. So it's really your entire torso is your core. So I did work that was targeted just in my belly area, but I also did a lot of work on my shoulders. But I had to learn, which was something PT never talked to me about, that if I was doing stuff here and not feeling support from this lower part of my body, that it was an imbalance that I needed to shift. So all of this I find to be true in almost everyone's bodies. And for me, doing that work was like this amazing aha into the singing world, because everything that I was learning suddenly gave me an understanding of what I had read that was probably not particularly well written, because it was coming from a lot of the way that the voice world functions, I think, is by sort of storytelling coming from generations before, of like, well, this is how you do it. This is what a Padjo is. This is what support is. This is what foundation is. And it's not talked about from the standpoint of movement or from the standpoint of breath or reflexiveness in the body or any of that kind of stuff. But as I learned it, I was like, wait a minute, this is what was always sort of there for me, but sort of not when I was singing. And it's so true in everyone else's bodies that I have worked with. So the core piece of things is often It's the fundamental work that I will do with someone. And it's the work that we're going to get into in the What Every Singer Needs to Know About the Core workshop that's coming up on February 3rd. It's a little more than half full at this point. There are still spaces, and the early bird registration ends. Today is the last day to get it. In reality, I'm not going to be up at midnight to change the price. So you probably really have until about 9 a.m. tomorrow on the 16th. To get track of this. My dog is sitting right behind me and I'm afraid he might knock over my computer. Stay right where you are. So if anyone has questions about the workshop, feel free to post them or message me about them. If you would like to know more about what I did for my core and shoulders and neck, you can always set up a time to talk with me, or you can come to the workshop. A version of the workshop will be in the library. We're going to get to that over the course of the year. It will be sort of rolled out in stages because I'm not going to do a 3-hour segment for the workshop. We'll sort of break it into components of things that you need to know. So I hope that you all will consider joining me if you are local to the Boston area for the workshop. And I'm always very interested to hear other people's stories of their bodies, particularly how they relate to your voice. So if you have a story to tell, I would love to talk to you. Anyway, it's now almost 11:15 and I have a ton of things to get onto in the rest of my day. So I hope you all have an awesome day. Do some happy singing. Go check out the Full Voice podcast. And remember, compassion is the fountain of forgiveness. Have a great day. I'll see you later.